today's date is 24 February 2023. I'm in Arlington, Virginia, speaking with Michael Boyer. Thank you, Michael, for sitting down and talking to us. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome, Dennis.
If you could just give us a little bit of background on yourself. Where were you born, grew up, where'd you go to school?
I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay.
I actually went to school in Arnold, Missouri, about 20 miles south of St. Louis. I graduated from high school in 1972, and I joined the military in 1972 in November.
Okay.
And from there, it just went haywire.
What branch of the service were you in?
I went into the United States Army.
Okay. You have any other family members?
Yes, I do. I'm the youngest of 9 kids, so
Okay.
I have a lot of family members that went into the military. I have 3 brothers that had served in the military, 2 in the Army,
Okay.
1 in the Marines. I have a brother-in-law that served in the Army, and so I was quite adept to knowing what the military was going to be like.
Yeah. What year did you go in?
1972.
Yeah. And enlisted?
Yes, I did. I went in as enlisted.
Yeah. Why'd you pick the Army and why the military?
Well, I picked the military because I had a long talk with the young lady that I affectionately call Mom now. She's 94 years old, and she sat me down and said, "You're not college material, Michael. You need to do something else."
Okay.
And so I said, well, I've had other brothers that went into the military, and they went right out of high school, so
Yeah.
I decided that was the way to go.
Gotcha. And why'd you pick the Army?
I picked the Army because 2 of my other brothers went in to the Army, and they liked it. One of them went to Vietnam and served as a LRP person. You know, he was on a LRP squad, long range reconnaissance patrol. And the other brother went into the Army and went to Germany, and that sounded really enticing to me. And my oldest brother Gerald went into the Marines, and he was stationed in the Alaskan area for the 2 years that he was in.
Okay.
Back then you could go 2, 3, 4 years, but he went 2 years.
I see. Okay. What war or conflict did you serve during?
Well, I served during Vietnam.
Okay.
Just as they were getting ready to come back from Vietnam, I actually was signed to go to the 101st Airborne Division.
Okay.
And during that time, as I said, they were getting ready to come back, but I had orders to go to Vietnam. So I went into the battalion command, and I knew some of the ranks because of the fact that I had brothers that were in the military in the past.
Right.
So I went in and I said, can I speak to somebody about these orders? And they said, sure, but you know you're going to Vietnam, right? And I said, does that make sense to anybody? Said, I'm going to the 101st in Vietnam, and they're coming back from Vietnam in the next 3 months. Why would you send me over when I could be part of the reception team here? And I was speaking to a young specialist,
Okay.
and he said, because you're on orders. And I said, can I speak to your officer in charge? And he says, private, I just told you what you're doing. And I said, again, can I speak to the officer in charge? Just at that time, a captain walked in. I said, are you in charge? And he says, I certainly am. He says, you have a problem? And I said, I do. I have a question. Why would you send somebody to Vietnam when the 101st is being redeployed back to the United States within the next 3 months? He said, we wouldn't. I said, well, this young specialist is sending me to Vietnam. And he said, well, let's have a talk about that. Well, the talk between them went into a different room. He came back and said, you're going to stay here. And I said, well, isn't that a wise idea? I'm glad you came up with that. So that's how my military started.
Gotcha.
Or not artery, but asking a specialist why he was doing something stupid.
So you learned early on that the military doesn't always do things that make sense.
Yes. And I had known that because, like I said earlier, I had brothers in the military, and they had told me,
Yeah.
it won't make sense to you, Michael, but you can work through the deals.
Right. What was your desire to do in the military?
Well, I went in as an infantryman.
Okay.
I took the ASVABs, and of course at that time they were really low. I made high scores, but they were offering me things like mechanical engineer, not mechanical engineer, but mechanical operations.
Right.
And intelligence. I didn't know anything about intelligence because I had just graduated from high school. My brothers were all in the military, and they were all in the infantry.
Okay.
And so I said, I just want to do that. And the recruiter said, your scores are high enough you could choose anything you want. And I said, well, yeah, but that's what I want to do. He said, okay, you'll make great rank, He lied to me about that too.
Second lesson learned.
Yes. They lie to you, and they don't do things quickly. And they don't do things that are obvious.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what happened. That's how I got forward. I was able to choose, though, where I wanted to go for my first 2 years and for my second 2 years, because I was only in for 4 years.
Gotcha.
So I chose Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It was 5 hours away from St. Louis. So I thought, well, that's good. I can come home on the weekends. And then I chose Germany because I had never been out of the United States. And I'd always wanted to go to Germany. My family is from France because of the Boyer name. And so I said, well, I'm going to go to Germany my second 2 years. And it was fantastic. I spent my 2 years at Fort Campbell, came home just about every weekend.
Okay.
And then I went to Germany. Germany was wonderful.
What'd you do when you were in Germany?
I was
infantry, right?
I was still infantry. I went to an infantry division, but it was a mechanized infantry division. The 8th Infantry Division is where I went. And they were stationed in Baumholder, Germany. Now, if anybody's been to Baumholder, they know one thing about it. It's cold as all get out during the winter, and it's hot as all get out in the summer because it sits up on a mountain. And so you get the winds coming in, and you get the storms coming in for the cold or for the warm, and it's hot all the time. But it was great. We thoroughly enjoyed it.
Okay. What's the mission while you're there?
You're a mechanized infantry division. I was attached to that, and it's attached to Fifth Corps. Excuse me, I messed up on that. It's Fifth Corps, and so you're ready to defend the Fulda Gap, which is where the Russians would have attacked if they were going to attack again Germany or attack the United States through our services over there. So
your mission is to defend from a Russian invasion or Soviet invasion.
Soviet invasion
from
at that
East
time.
Germany.
Yes.
Or from East Germany to India.
Yes.
Gotcha.
That was our mission. And we would have been probably the second line of defense because we were mechanized, and we would have been moved by rail quickly if there was anything that showed signs of that happening. But the ACR, now I can't remember what that stands for. ACR. I'll come back to that. But the ACR was the first one in the Fulda Gap. They were actually stationed there, and they had helicopters. They had the Hueys that they would use to attack Armored Cavalry Regiment.
Okay.
ACR, Armored Cavalry Regiment.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So you're doing a lot of training, I'm assuming. Right?
Yes.
That's pretty much.
We trained at Grafenwehr. We trained at Baumholder, had their own training fields. And we would go to Grafenwehr and train there. And Grafenwehr, just like Baumholder, was on a hill, and it was muddy, and it was cold, and it was something that you just didn't really want to do.
Yeah.
But that's what we did.
Right. What do you do for fun?
For fun?
Training? Yeah.
Oh, travel. I mean, when I was in Europe, I was able to go to Paris within 2 hours.
Wow.
So on a long weekend, if we got a 3-day weekend, I would catch a train, and we had a train come through our town. So I would catch that train and then go over to Paris. I had to go to a bigger city, which would have been Frankfurt at that time. And I would go to Frankfurt and catch a train from Frankfurt to Paris. And then I'd spend a weekend there.
Okay.
And there was other places,
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia, we could still go there. We couldn't get over to the east side of Berlin, but the east side, but we could go to the west side until the wall fell.
Yeah. So how real was the perceived threat that, I mean, you're literally tip of the spear. I mean, the Soviets are coming, you're there,
Yes.
you're right there. How real was that threat in your mind or
In the minds of the 8th Infantry Division, which was under 5th Corps, it was a real threat because, again, we were a mechanized unit. There was the ACR out there, but they also had the 1st Armored Division, which was stationed out there, and of course they were tanks. We were mechanized. We'd jump into a half track, and of course it only had a 50 caliber on it, whereas the tanks had their big guns. And we would be there to fight the infantry portion of it, but the armored and the ACR would be to hit the first strike. And so we would come in after that. So we would be the third line of defense coming in.
You said you got out after 4 years, or you?
Actually, I got to Germany and didn't like where I was stationed, so I asked for a transfer. I re-upped for 2 extra years and was able to stay where I go to a different place. I went to Göppingen, Germany, and ended up working there. And it was really beautiful. It was down in the valley. It wasn't as cold as Baumholder, and everything was nicer.
Yeah.
And we weren't the second line of defense. We were further back. But I was still I was in a straight laid infantry division then.
Okay. How long were you there?
I was there for a year and a half, and then I went back to Fort Campbell for my last 2 years. That was the deal I made. I'd spend 2 years in Germany, and then I'd go back. But I had to re-enlist to stay there, or to get out of the mechanized unit into a different one. And so then I went back to Fort Campbell. Then I ETS'd in 78. Then there was a 10-year gap from 78 to 88 where I just went around doing different things. I had different jobs and things.
Okay.
Things I liked but didn't really want to stay at. And then my wife said, you know what? You were happier when you were in the military. Why don't we do something like that? So I went down to the enlistment branch, and I talked to a gentleman and said, I've been in the military for 6 years, and the cutoff for that is because of my age. They said, you know, we can get you back in because you've served 6 years, so you minus the 6 years from whatever age you are to meet the requirement to go back in.
Really? Okay.
Yes, so I was able to go back in.
How old were you?
38.
Okay.
So I got out of the military at that time. Well, I take it back. I got out when I was 27, but I stayed out until I was 38.
Yeah.
So with the 6 years, I go back 6 years, so I was still able to beat the 2-year 32, because 34 was the cutoff.
That's it.
And so I went back in as a 32-year-old, although I was actually 38, but I went back in at 38.
Gotcha.
And I was able to go back in. I went in as an E4, exactly what I came out as, and served with 7th Corps at that time.
Okay. Doing the same thing?
No,
Infantry?
no.
No.
I went back in as a mechanic. They said, hey, you can do this. This is what we're looking for right now. And I said, okay, I'm going to go back as a mechanic. I should have thought about that because I had a degree. I should have went in as an officer, but at the time I wasn't thinking that.
Right.
But I went back as a mechanic, and I said, wow, I could be a warrant officer if I would have been smart. Wasn't that intelligent at the time. Just wanted to get back to Germany, and I had my guarantee of going to Germany at the very first. So that's where we went to Germany to stay and work there.
You didn't have to repeat any kind of training or
Yes, I did.
You did.
Went
Basic.
through basic training again, and I didn't mention this first round. First round of basic training, I was the honor graduate. Second round of basic training, I was the honor graduate.
Wow.
AIT, I was the honor graduate.
Okay.
Of course, I was 38 years old at the time and knew a lot about what was going on in the military.
So what's it like going through basic training as a 38-year-old with kids that are 18, 19 years
Whoa, that was tough. But I had a great, oh, wow. All of a sudden, I can't think of what they were. He was an E6, but he wasn't called a drill sergeant. Thank you. I had a great drill sergeant. This guy had 28 years of service, and he was getting ready to retire. He was an E7, and he was going to retire. And he said, you know, I like you, and I like that you're older, so I'm going to put you in charge when I go home on the weekend.
Wow.
And he said, and you're already a PFC, so you're going to do everything that I tell you to do, but you're going to tell them that I'm telling you to do it. And I said, okay, that works great for me. And since I had already known the military, he gave me rule over everything.
Wow.
And there was times when guys would say, no, we're not doing that. And I'd say, no problem. I'll make one phone call, the drill sergeant will come in, he'll put you in attention, he'll probably treat you like a dog, and then you'll do what I'm telling you to do anyway. So which do you want to do? My way, which is the easy way, or your way, which is going to make it hard on you?
Right.
Oh, well, we'll do it your way. So I got things done.
Yeah.
And that's how I graduated, honor graduate again, because I knew everything that was supposed to be going on. And so, but it was fun. Second time was a lot of fun.
Yeah. You got an interesting perspective because there's a gap between
Yes.
basic training. So what are we talking, 14, 15 years between basic training stints?
No, actually, it was only, let's see, I got out at 24. I was 6 years in, so I went in at 18, got out at 24 to 38, 14 years.
14 years.
Yeah,
How much it changed?
a lot.
Yeah.
A lot had changed. We didn't any longer run in combat boots. When I came in '72, everybody ran in combat boots, which really was kind of ridiculous because you were tearing your legs up running in combat boots, for PT, that is. And when we got in there then, we were running in tennis shoes, which made it a lot easier, but it made it harder because you had to have the tennis shoes cleaned after every run.
Right.
So if we ran through whatever it was, mud, dirt, water, and they got dirty, then you had to set them out. You had to clean them before. So I taught the whole troop that I was in, the group, I said, get a second pair. Wear these to run in, put them underneath your bunk, and put the good ones out there for display, because then the drill sergeant won't be yelling at you every time because you got dirty shoes out there. So, and they were dumb. Kids were dumb. Because they, again, we're talking, let's see, 88. It was a time when we were through with the drugs and everything that we had done in the 70s, and the 80s had gotten into something a little different, and they were doing a little heavier drugs than we were doing,
Right.
which was terrible. And so I had to babysit a lot of guys who were in because they were forced to go in or go to jail.
Right.
So it was either you go to jail or you go in the military. And so these guys would come in and they'd be on withdrawal for 5 or 6 weeks,
Right.
trying to withdraw after they, had done drugs and everything before they came in the military. So that was a babysitting program.
Yeah.
And a lot of them got washed out right at the beginning,
Yeah. I imagine.
which really made it bad for them.
You're a mechanic, you said?
I was.
What are you working on?
I worked on anything that the military had me trained on, which went from a Jeep to tracks, Humvees to tracks, Humvees to tanks, but I never worked in the field, believe it or not.
Wow.
I was fortunate when I was in the military the first time that I had worked for what is called the protocol for a division or a corps. They have protocol people. And I was a driver for the sergeant major of the 101st when I got out. And I'd also driven for General Wickham, who went on to be a 4-star. He was the division commander, and he went on to be a 4-star. So when I got to Europe, my first assignment as a mechanic, I was in E4, and I talked to one of the guys because I knew a lot about what was going on, and I said, I understand. I had talked to a couple friends, and they said 7th Corps is looking for protocol people. And so I said, I understand the 7th Corps is looking for protocol people. I've got protocol experience.
Okay.
And so I gave them all the experience that I had driven for a 2-star general, that I had worked with the command sergeant major on all the parades and everything that they had done. And so that goes into a lot of what protocol is all about. And there was an E5 there. He said, I'm going to hook you up. He says, I don't think you want to go down to where we're going to send you. And I said, where is it? He says, 3rd Armored Division. I said, no, I don't want to go there. Said, it'd be much better if I went to 7th Corps or even 5th Corps. And they said, no, 7th Corps is looking for protocol people.
Okay.
So he got me an interview on the phone, and they said, we're going to accept you. Come on down. And at that time, they didn't care what my MOS was because they needed protocol people who had experience in what they were, doing with the protocol. And so I went to 7th Corps in Stuttgart, Germany. It was actually Kelly Barracks, and I was assigned to them. I walked into the company commander's office when I first got, or I actually walked into the NCOIC, and he said, the company commander wants to see you right away. And I said, okay. So I go into his office, I salute, I tell him who I am, and he said, I'm putting you with the 7th Corps commander. And I said, I'm going to be driving for the Corps commander? He says, no, you're going to be working in the Corps commander's office, but you're going to be driving for the chief of staff. And I said, that sounds like a good idea. Well, it didn't work that way. I get over there and they said, we don't know why he told you that. You're going to be one of our normal drivers. We've already got somebody taking over for the chief of staff because he's bringing his own. We were switching out chiefs of staffs at that time.
Right.
The old one was leaving and General Landry was coming in, and he would be our chief of staff when we went to Desert Storm. So he got there about '89, about the same time I did. So and he was bringing his own driver. Well, his own driver decided at the last minute that he didn't want to come, so then they opened it up to interviews. And I was his last interview. And he had already made a decision, even though he told his XO, who was his XO, who was a major, Dan Wiley. He said, Dan, I already know who I want, but you can send this guy in. And he had talked to him, and he told me, he says, you're not going to get the job, but go in and interview. And I said, why am I not getting it? Because he's got a job. He interviewed a guy already, and he wants to take that guy. And I said, so why am I going in? He said, just go in and interview. And so I went in and interviewed, and he said, so tell me about yourself. And I told him all about my background and everything, how I'd been in the military before and how I had served and had a family that had served and everything. And he said, okay, tell me something important that I need to know. And I said, here's something important you need to know. I'm going to see you in situations that you're not going to want other people to know about. I'm going to see you in a situation that you and your wife are discussing, and you don't want anybody else to know about that too. And because of my age and my knowledge, I'm going to keep that a secret, and nobody else is going to know about it either. And he looked at me and says, you're hired. And he walked out and he said, Dan, I want this guy. And Dan said, I thought you would, sir. And Dan told me afterwards, he said, I told him that he needed to interview because of your age. Because the other guys were all in their 20s, 21, 22. One of them was an E4 like me, but he was 22 years old. And he said, I think you ought to interview this guy because of his age. And he says, well, I don't want a guy that's old. And he said, just please, sir, just take an interview with him. And so that's what happened. So I ended up being the chief of staff's driver, General Landry.
Okay. You said you used the term protocol. What does that mean?
Protocol is where we set up for ceremonies. We give the information to all the generals on what's going on. We keep track of who they have meetings with. We get them to those meetings. We take them to wherever they need to be. We have the names of everybody they're going to be introduced to on the tip of our tongue, and we can say, oh, this is General so-and-so, or you're going down to see Mayor Ramo in Stuttgart today. You need to know this and this, you know, and we keep them informed. But we also do all the ceremonies that are going on.
Right. Okay. Where were you when Iraq invades Kuwait?
I was still at 7th Corps. In fact, I went to 7th Corps with the Corps headquarters, and I served under General Landry throughout the whole time. And then when we came back, so yes, 7th Corps deployed. In fact, I was probably there after about a week because General Frank said, John, I want you to go down and be there for the reception of the people coming in. I want you to make sure everything's set up the way we want it, and then we'll go from there. Okay. And so, of course, he said, you're going with me. I'd already worked with him for 2 years. And so we bonded with each other. I knew exactly what he needed, where he was going to be, what was going on. And there had been no mishaps in my taking him to wherever you needed to be. And so he said, I want you going with me. You're going to act as my aide-de-camp, not my driver. Because a general at the Corps level doesn't have an aide-de-camp. You have to be at least a 2-star to have that. And so the 2-star, 3-star had aide-de-camps, but the 1-star, because he was the chief of staff, they didn't give him an aide-de-camp. So that's what I acted as for him the whole time. Okay. In fact, there was times when he'd have me sit in a meeting and I'd be taking copious notes, and then we'd compare notes afterwards. He said, Michael, what did I miss on this one? And I'd tell him, well, sir, he said we're moving 2 brigades instead of 3, and you have it as 3. And he goes, okay, just correct it. Make sure all the notes get handed in to Susie so she can type them out. Okay. And that's the kind of things I did.
Yeah. Was that a good assignment?
It was a great assignment.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a great guy to work for. He was a little stern at times. Yeah. During Desert Storm, in fact, I got fired 4 times.
Really?
Never got fired, but I got fired 4 times by him. I mean, there was one time when he's in my chest telling me, you're done. I don't want to see you again. Yes, sir. I'll make sure they get that note back there.
Right.
But never got fired, actually, because they would tell him, sir, it's not Michael that's flying that helicopter, you know, because you're firing him because the helicopter got lost. And he would say, it's his job to get me where I'm supposed to go. He's my aide. And I said, well, really, I'm only your driver. But he was a good man. He helped me through my promotions. I got promoted to E5 almost probably 7 months after I got there. And so, but I'd been an E4 for many years, so they promoted me. And then I got promoted to E6 while I was out at Desert Storm. And then actually, after Desert Storm, I applied for Warrant Officer School and was accepted, and I got promoted to E7 while I was at Warrant Officer School. So, but I denied it, of course, because I was going to be a warrant officer instead of enlisted. So,
where are you stationed when you're working for
General Landry?
General Frank? No, for General Franks.
For General Frank, I worked for him out at 7th Corps.
Okay.
But it was Stuttgart was where we were stationed at Kelly Barracks.
Okay.
It was General Franks was the Corps commander.
Gotcha.
General Danielson was the deputy corps commander, and then General Landry was the chief of staff. So that was the three we had at that time. But we had many people that came through that became general officers.
Gotcha.
And it was like an open door. These guys came through when they were the G3. Stan Cherry, who became general, he was a 2-star when he retired. General Saseki, who was the chief of staff of the Army, was a colonel when he came through. Right. And so I had friendships with them before they became 4-stars, and knew them as they were as a colonel, and then the 2-star, and then the 3 4-star. So it was kind of exciting knowing all these people as they were coming through, and then they were getting promoted like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really kind of neat.
And are you in Germany during Desert Storm?
Yes, we were in Germany at Stuttgart, which is the capital of Germany, and of that part of Germany. And yeah, we had a great time in Germany. Stayed there. We actually stayed there until '96, because I came back from Warrant Officer School and then went there. In between, though, I was assigned to 5th Corps, because 7th Corps closed down. So when we came back from Desert Storm, we deactivated 7th Corps, and we got a new chief of staff. It was General Robertson. And General Robertson was the chief of staff, and then he was asked to go to 5th Corps as the chief of staff. Well, he moved me with him because of the job I was doing for him. Right. And that was in '92. No, it was in '90. And we had a terrible incident in '91. General Robertson was killed in a helicopter accident. And I happened to be there when that happened, at the airfield, ready to pick him up. His helicopter came in, and he was with 6 other people. We lost 4 in that helicopter crash. General Robertson, Colonel Kelly, Colonel Gleisberg, and then trying to think of the other gentleman, Specialist Rhodes. He was the chief of the helicopter. He would do all the maintenance, crew chief, yes. He was the crew chief. And
was it just a mechanical error?
it was error on the Swarovski helicopter. If you were flying in it, we had the outer tubes that would hold fuel. And one of the fuel tanks had a bad leak, and it was caused by a gasket. And we had flown down, or they had flown down. I didn't go this time. He had a captain aide-de-camp that was with him because he was being promoted to 2-star, so he was doing aide-de-camp that was a captain. He flew down with him, and they flew down to Kelly Barracks. We were in Heidelberg, Heidelberg, and he flew down to Kelly Barracks for a meeting. And as they were sitting there, the pilots would normally stay with it, but it was a 3-hour meeting, so they got out, they landed, they got out, went back and had, coffee and things like that at the mess. Then they went back when they got ready to leave at 1600. They called us and let us know they were coming in. I was dispatched right away to go pick him up at the airfield, Wiesbaden Airfield. Yeah, that's where we were, Wiesbaden, Frankfurt. I said Heidelberg, it was Frankfurt, and when we flew down, when they flew down. And so I went back to pick him up, and we had landed. The military police let us inside the gates because he couldn't bring a car on the airfield. So we bought the car in, parked, and I was the only one there. So I was sitting there watching, and I knew exactly when they were coming in. So as they turned to come in, there was a overweight side on one side because the other gas tank had leaked so much gas that when they came in, they nosedived, missing the fence. They nosedived in and spun around, and the helicopter exploded and caught on fire. I rushed from my car. There was a specialist that was walking along, and I yelled at him to come on and help me because we were going to try to get people out of the helicopter. So I ran to the one side, and it was engulfed in flames. We couldn't open up the door, and I ran around to the other side, and he followed me, and there were two people getting out on that side. And as one of them got out, he was General Robertson's aide-de-camp. He was rolling on the ground because he had flames engulfing him, and he rolled underneath the fuselage. Well, at that time, I jumped underneath the fuselage, grabbed him, and pulled him out. And then the other gentleman, the other Spec 4 that was there, he grabbed him and carried him off to the other side. And then I helped Mancini, who was a co-pilot, get out of his seat. We unstrapped him and got him out of his seat. And the other side, and I forget the gentleman's name right now, Rasmussen. He was a CW2. Rasmussen was on the other side. We pulled him out and then moved them away and everything. And by then, the COSCOM commander, who was in charge, he was a one-star in charge of the airfield, he came down and he grabbed me and started asking me questions, you know, who's still in the plane, and I had to tell him the unfortunate information about it being General Robertson and Colonel Kelly and Colonel Giesberg. And so they, of course, then had to call the wives and let them know, but they wanted to make sure that I wasn't wrong, so they checked all the manifests and everything. So they did that, and then I stayed with the general to make sure we knew everything and who he was calling and all that. Of course, he knew the three people because he had been in meetings over at the Frankfurt area. Yeah. Wow, this is bringing back a lot of memories. The other gentlemen were taken to the hospital at Wiesbaden, and they came out with severe burns, some of them. One of the pilots had severe burns all over his arms, and for years, probably 2 or 3 years, he was recuperating from those burns. It was devastating. We did finally get the flames out, and at that time I had to ID the three gentlemen where they were sitting and everything. And the only thing I could ID on General Robertson was his watch. It was a Rolex that he wore all the time. His wife had given it to him, and it survived the burns and everything. But the other two gentlemen were burned beyond recognition. But I knew what the sitting arrangement would have been, and sure enough, they confirmed that it was General Robertson, General Kelly, or Colonel Kelly, and Colonel Giesberg. So then, after it was all said and done, and we had the ambulances there to take care of the ones that were injured, and to also take care of General Robertson's remains and everything. The fire department put out the fire, of course, like we said, and then I had to drive home, and they told me to go to immediately to General Robertson's home because his wife, Deborah, was asking for me. So I went there and had to break the news to them. Of course, she knew, and I confirmed it for her. And luckily, General Robertson had been divorced. His youngest daughter was there, and she was, of course, anxious to hear what I had to say. And I had to tell her that our father had died. And as I said, I helped take care of all that. Went over there and spent some time with Mrs. Robertson and Trish, his youngest daughter. And then I became good friends with the family that I didn't know because I would go in and see the Robertsons when I had assignments over in the DC area. And so I got to know them very well too. That was his first wife in the family. He had 5 daughters. And it was funny because when they would call, he'd ask, is it daughter 1 or 5, 1 through 5, you know? And I'd say, it's number 2. And he'd, okay, put him through. If it was number 4, you know, right now I ain't got time to talk to her, you know. because she's at college, she wants more money or something like that. But there were some great times though with the Robertsons after I got through with helping Deborah. There was a long lawsuit though. It took 5 years or longer than that, 7 years for Sawarsky to admit that it was their problem. That yes, and they finally did. The people that were injured and those that lost someone actually reaped a lot of money at the end. And that's not what the big thing is about that. It's the fact that they changed all the grommets and the rubber gaskets and everything on every Black Hawk, which they weren't owning up to. And it's probably saved lives since then. Another good thing was, and it's my personal, I received because of the actions that I took at that time, I'd received the Soldier's Medal, which is helping a person out of combat, for, saving their lives and things like that. And it was a big honor for me. And I think it actually helped me in several different ways, knowing that these people suffered. I suffered a little, but not as much as that, minor burns and things like that on my hands and stuff. But they were saved because I took action and didn't just sit there and watch that plane or that helicopter burn. Then after General Robertson, I was asked to go to a ADA to become a mechanic, which is what I was, trained to do.
Right.
So I went to an ADA unit out in Baumental, Germany, which is a little ghost of a town. It's not a very big town, probably 3,000 people, but there was an ADA unit, and I'm trying to think of the name of the unit right now, and the only thing I can come up with is the first of something, so I can't remember it all of a sudden. And I was there for right at 3 months, and we went to Bosnia. Now this is where my life really changed. So the unit was deployed to go to Bosnia. Well, I had some friends that worked at 5th Corps, and they knew me, of course. And I called them and said, hey, I'm coming to Bosnia. I'm going to be working for an ADA unit. And they said, how would you like to get transferred to the protocol office at, at 5th Corps? And I said, I don't think they're going to want that because I'm the only warrant officer coming. And the guy that I was talking to was a master sergeant. He said, let me take care of that. And so I got there, he kept track of where the unit was going and everything. He got a phone number for it. And we were still inbound, getting ready to go to our actual assignment where we were going to be assigned to be. So we were in a holding area. And he comes over, he calls first, and he says, I'm going to come over and pick you up. I want you to do an interview. Have you got a few minutes? And I said, how long is it going to take? He said, a couple hours. I said, yeah, we're not doing anything. I have free time. I'm just sitting here in my bunk. And he had called to the company commander's office, and they came and got me. And I'm on the phone talking to him, and he said, you're going to interview with a young major that I know very well, and I think she's going to ask you to come up and work with us. And I said, boy, that would be nice. So remember, I'm a CW1 at that time,
right,
or Warrant Officer 1, because I didn't have CW, Warrant Officer 1 at that time. And so I go interview, and she's a young major. She looks at me, and her name was Sangel, and she goes, so what's so special about you again? And I said, there's nothing special about me. I'm just an older warrant officer, and I can give you a lot of, maturity, whereas you're using these young lieutenants and things that you don't have that are 18, 20, 24, right, whatever they are. And I said, I'm just going to give you a little maturity. And she goes, that's all you're offering me. And she said, Dan put you up to be this really great guy. And I said, okay, I have the Soldier's Medal. You have a Soldier's Medal? I said, yes. She goes, and who did you save? And I said, it's a long story, but I did save some lives, and they were military lives. She goes, okay, I'm going to have you interview with Brigadier General Bell. And I said, okay, I don't know who that is. She goes, I'll introduce you to him, and you'll interview with him, and then we'll find out if you're going to get the job or not. And I said, okay. So she goes in and she talks to General Abrams, who is the commander at the time for what we were doing in Bosnia. General Bell was his chief of staff. So I go down and start talking to General Bell. And all of a sudden, General Abrams goes, "Chief." And of course, I'm thinking he's not talking to me because I know he's the chief of staff. And General Bell goes, "Yes, sir." And he says, "No, not you, the other chief. Come here." And so I'm like, and General Bell goes, "What's he want you for?" I said, "I don't know, sir." And so I walk up there, and he goes, "You were at 7th Corps, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "And you've got the soldiers now?" And I said, "Yes." He says, "You're hired. I want you to be with the protocol team." And General Bell says, "Sir, I haven't interviewed him yet." He says, "I just did." And so General Bell goes, "Okay, come on back down here and I'll tell you what I want you to do." You know? And so Joan Sangle had walked off, Major Sangle. Well, I didn't know that she had worked for him for many years. She was a captain when she first met him when he was a colonel. And so she went in and told him, "Sir, you want this guy. He's really good. You know, he's got the soldier's medal. He's smart. He's mature. We need that here because we're going to be dealing with a lot of high official rankings and everything." And so, man, from there it went just uphill. I mean, I was doing great things. I met President Clinton. I met the Chief of Staff of the Army. I met the Secretary of Defense. I mean, all these guys were coming through to Bosnia, you know, to get the break on what was going on with everything that was going on in Herzegovina at the time.
Right.
And so it was like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm meeting people. I was gone from my wife, who were, you know, they were in Germany, and I was gone for 2 years being there. It was so much fun. I'd go home on an occasion, you know, Joan would, Major Sangle, who then got promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. So Lieutenant Colonel said, Sangle said, "Hey, there's a dispatch going home on a flight. Go ahead, take a couple days and go see your wife and kids and stuff." And she knew I was married, of course. And I said, "No, that's okay, I'll stay." And she said, "No, I've got a big one coming up for you. You're going to be with Secretary of Defense. So I want you fresh. Go home, spend a couple days there." So I come back and we knock out Secretary of Defense. You know, that was Secretary of Defense Perry at the time. And so he came over and I got one of his coins, which was really kind of neat, you know. Yeah. Not many guys as a war officer get a coin from the Secretary of Defense. So, so that happened. Secretary of the Army, Togo, came over. I was assigned to be with him. And I don't know why I got assigned with him, other than the fact that the lieutenant colonel, who would have been escorting, didn't like doing that kind of stuff. You know, she wanted to stay with General Abrams because she knew his mannerisms, what was going on. Right. And General Abrams apparently trusted me because he said, "I'm going to give you a hard one now." He called me in one day and he goes, "I want you to go down and prepare for the President of the United States coming into Herzegovina, or down to the base we're at, not Herzegovina, but the base." I said, "You're sending me?" And he says, "Yes. And you tell him anything you need is coming because he's telling you to go." And he pointed to General Bell, "My chief of staff." And I said, "Not you." He said, "No, just use his name." I said, "That way he's in trouble, not me." And I said, "Sir, I'll do exactly as you asked." So I was sent down there, and it was really kind of neat because the president's front people came in. Right. And they were all Secret Service men, and they had one major. His name was Major Mike Mudd. And I went up and introduced myself, and I said, "Major, I'm Michael Boyer. I'm going to be your escort during this period, get you all set up and where you're going and everything." He says, "You're a warrant officer." I said, "Yes, sir, but I got a lot of rank behind me." And he goes, "Like who?" And I said, "Well, I can go to General Abrams or I can go to General Bell, but I think just Bell will do it." He goes, "Who's General Bell?" I said, "He's chief of staff of this organizational structure we're under." He goes, "Okay, you'll work then." Because he's a major, he's thinking, what's a warrant officer going to be able to do for me? Right. So he said, "First thing I need," we didn't bring sleeping bags. We don't have cots. We don't have any of that kind of stuff. He said, "We were told to get on the plane, get over here, prepare for President Clinton coming in." And I said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "I'll take care of everything. Give me an hour, I'll get back with you." I said, "For now, you guys just relax here, and I'll get you a place to stay and everything." So I go down, and I start talking to the battalion commander, and I forget his name all of a sudden, but I'm talking to him, and he says, "And you're with who?" And I said, "I'm a representative from General Bell." "Oh, okay, well, if BB wants it, you're going to get it, you know. And everybody called him BB Bell, you know, because his first name was Burris or something, Burris, Burris was his first name, but he went by BB Bell because the second name was something else too. So he just went by BB Bell. So anyway, I'm not supposed to pull my but anyway, it was one of those things where anything I asked for, man, it was dropped right on me. So I'm talking to a battalion commander at the time, which is a lieutenant colonel, of course. And so I knew that General General Cherry was the guy in charge of this unit. And I had worked with him as he was the G3 during Desert Storm. And we were quite often talking about sports and things like that. So he knew me. So I went up to his office and I said, is General Cherry going to be back in a few minutes? I need to talk to him about what's going on. Because when I was told to come down here, I was also told I needed to brief him on anything that happened. And these guys were new coming in, so I knew that was new to him. And so they said, yes, but he's not going to be back for about 15 minutes, but if you wait here in his office. And I said, no, I think I need to wait out here. There's no room for you out here. We got a lot of things going on. So I step into his office, and I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to sit down. So I sat down in a chair in front of his desk. Then I thought, you know what, I ought to call General Bell and let him know that, the people have gotten here.
Right.
So I go behind his desk, and I'm sitting there, and I dialed through, and I get the number, I'm talking to him. And I said, General Bell, I said, the front people for the president are here. And he says, well, you need to get with Cherry and let him know. And I said, well, I'm at his office now, but he's not here. And he walks in at that time, and I'm on the phone. And he looks at me and he goes, Boyer, what the hell are you doing? And I said, I'm on the phone with BB, sir. And BB goes, that's General Bell to you. And I said, I'm on the phone with General Bell, General Cherry. He goes, okay, well, give me the phone. So I give him the phone, they talk. Then he gets off the phone, he says, what are you using my office for? I said, well, I came up to brief you that the front people for the president had come in, and I wanted you to know firsthand so you wouldn't be getting the second hand from General Bell. And he says, oh, covering my butt, huh? I said, yeah, that's what I was trying to do. He said, sorry about sitting at your desk, but since I'm here, can I make a couple other phone calls? He says, yeah, out there. So that was, and then of course, the president gets ready to land. The front people are great. I mean, I get them everything they need. I'm walking around helping them get all this stuff. Of course, General Cherry's telling me, you get any problems, you call me. Right. And then I had a cell phone, and I didn't think about that when I was calling him on the regular line. So I got a cell phone then, and I said, I'll call you, sir. So a couple of hiccups happened. I called General Cherry, and I say, hey, your guys are giving me problems about the route and everything. He said, you tell them I said you take whatever they want for the route. And I said, okay. So they wanted to go outside the gate, which it was still uncharted land for us. We had gotten the defense down there and put people in place, right. But outside was still things that were a little wacky. But they wanted to go outside. So Cherry goes, you told him that we still don't have control of everything out there. And he says, I said, yeah, I told him. But Major Mudd, who's in charge, says the president wants to go out and visit some of the people out on the front. And he says, okay. He says, we'll set up something for him. And I didn't tell that to Mudd. I said, well, sir, can it be something on the wall or near a line or something like that? And he says, yeah, I'll take care of it. So he goes and he gets them all set up. They got a pillbox that we're going to go into. And so he's got he put a unit around it and everything, like they've been there for a while. Right. And I take Mudd and them guys out there, and he says, so this is where the boss is going to come. And I said, yes, the president will come here. And I said, and we've got an armored up Humvee for him to drive in. And then we've got, 2 Humvees that'll be with him with 50 calibers, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, so it'll be 4. I said, he'll be, and the Secret Service guys are going, we'll be in the Humvees. I said, I don't care. They're driving though. And he says, well, why can't we drive? I said, because they're military vehicles. And last I heard, you guys don't have those kind of licenses, And they said, well, we're the Secret Service. And Mudd goes, no, he's actually right, because you got to get a special license to drive a Humvee, and you guys don't drive in Humvees. And he said, okay, we'll ride a shotgun. I said, okay, that's fine with me. You can get your little, 9 millimeters, 45s, whatever you're carrying, but they got 50 calibers on top that they're going to be shooting people with. So don't run out there in front of them. So I know I'm kind of joking with them, and they're going, yeah, yeah, you're right. We shouldn't do that. So we take him down there. We get him all set up and everything. He likes it. The Secret Service guy likes it and everything, and they come back. And so the day he lands, Mud comes up to me and goes, "You're going to be driving the boss." I said, "Not me." He said, "No, you're going to be driving the boss." He says, "I found out that you're a protocol guy and you've done these, you know how to drive for the Humvees and all that kind of stuff. You got a license. I'm letting you drive for him." I said, "Let me be the backup in case something happens." I said, "Let the kid that's driving go ahead and do it." He says, "You don't want to meet the boss?" I said, "Sure, I want to meet him, but I don't want to be the driver."
Boss, you mean the president?
The president, yeah. His boss is the president.
Right.
You know, they called him the boss. You know, and then when he was there, they called him Mr. President all the time, of course. And so he gets off the plane, and I'm there to, you know, to help with everything. Of course, General Abrams is there, the Secretary of Defense is there, the Secretary of State, our Secretary of the Army is there, and so they're all meeting him too, you know, so we're all there at the same time. And it was a goat rope, really, but it was kind of neat. And then I got a personal picture with him. He signed it. Mud got it and signed it, had it signed for me, sent it to me. So I got a picture of me as, you know, shaking Bill Clinton's hand. It isn't worth anything now, but when he was president of the United States, I got a bunch of drinks for it, even though I don't drink, you know. But yeah, so that was another great adventure. You know, my life has just been full of great adventures. It was hooking up with some of these guys that I knew when I was in 7th Corps that were colonels, and then they became 4-stars. I actually had a meeting with General Soseki when he, as a 4-star, and he was just so down to earth, you know. And then he became the secretary of the VA, and he took over that. Got a bad rap there. He was really trying to make changes for the military because he had been served by the VA because he lost a leg in Vietnam. And so he had been served there and everything, and he knew what needed to be changed, and that's why they appointed him at the time. Had a nice meeting with him. Great guy. He still lives in the D.C. area, so he goes to a lot of function in D.C. and everything. So, yeah. So where are we going from here? I mean, I've talked about a lot of things.
Yeah. So you get out in '96?
I got out in '96, yes. And when I got out in '96, the wife goes, "I want to stay in Germany. What are we going to do?" You know, I said, "I want to stay in Germany too." And I got out as a CW2.
Okay.
I was in I was in Bamberg, Germany when I got out. And I called a couple guys and said, "Hey, do I have to leave immediately?" And they said, "No. When you sign out, just tell them you're staying in Germany. You can stay up to 3 months." Okay. And I said, "Okay, I can stay up to 3 months." I said, "What happens then?" "You have to find a job." And I said, "Well, that won't be hard. You know, I can find a job anywhere." Well, I did. I actually found a job working for the 102nd, what were they called at that time? 102nd. Oh, they were in command of the whole area, that ASG, Army Support Group, ASG, the 102nd ASG, which was in Frankfurt, Germany. And so I got a job with them working as a computer guy. And so that's where we first started off. And then I stayed there, and my wife and I loved it in Germany because we had made some really good friends, German friends and stuff like that. So we stayed there, and I advanced myself a lot in the computer age. That's when we were first starting, because that was in the 90s, and you really hadn't started a lot of things. And as to make a long story short, I ended up being a cyber guy for First Information Operations Command out of Fort Belvoir. And they worked directly for the G3 of the Army. And so it was one of those deals where I could stay in Germany or I could come back to Fort Belvoir. Stay in Germany, I was 11. Come back to Belvoir, I could be a 13. You figure out 13, 11. I'm going to go back there and be a 13. So I go back to Fort Belvoir, and I become a 13, and I'm working Cyber Command and doing all the inside briefings for all of us. So we'd have a dignitary come in, and I would give them a briefing and everything. They liked me because I was older, I was mature, and I was working as a civilian, and I had the military background, so I knew all the ranks, and I could be able to talk to them and everything. We had a lot of military guys, or civilian guys that were military also, but they were most of them were enlisted guys that got out and knew computers and stuff like that. And so they wanted somebody with a little moxie, and that's what I was told. And so I said, okay. So I became a briefer for all the dignitaries that were coming down. And this is when we were first starting to learn how we could have a regional computer emergency response team in each one of the combatant command areas. So we had one in Europe for USAREUR and EUCOM, and then we had one in Hawaii, we had one in Korea, we had one down south in Southcom, and we had one in MacDill Air Force Base at COCOM. Not COCOM, NETCOM. No, not NETCOM.
Is it CENTCOM?
CENTCOM, thank you. Central Command. I couldn't get it out. I'm sorry. Couldn't get it out. Central Command, CENTCOM. And so we had a cyber team in each one of those areas because we would help with the division of how we're going to set up all of our cyber for the Army at that time. And then the Air Force had their own, so we were constantly battling them on who was in charge. But we were in charge of the Army portion for anything that went on at one of those combatant commands. So I was briefing on what we were doing because we were just setting those things up, which was really kind of neat. If you think about it, one headquarters could get all the information on cyber that was going on in all those locations at one place and brief the G3 of the Army. And so it became that time that I had to go brief the G3 of the Army one time. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, And so I'm thinking to myself, G3 of the Army I got to brief. I'm scared, because I've been around general officers for a lot of times, but the G3 of the Army is a whole different ballgame, because this guy's probably have all this accumulated information that he's gathered from all the cells that work for him, and he probably knows as much, if not more, than we do, because we're reporting that stuff to these lower cells too. So my boss goes with me, and we go in to brief him, and I give him the brief. And he's looking at me, and I told the boss, I said, this is way over his head. He's not going to understand any of this. We need to dumb it down for him. And he said, no, give him the brief, just like we told you. And I said, okay. So we get done, and I said, do you have any questions? He says, I don't have a question, but you're the best they have to come and brief me? And I said, yes, sir, I guess that's right. And he looks at my boss, and he goes, this is the best you can bring up here to brief me? And I'm thinking, man, I really screwed this up. And I said, well, sir, is there any questions, anything you don't understand? He says, I don't understand a thing you said. He says, you're talking way up here about computers, and I can barely turn mine on. He said, can you break this down to what I want to need? And I looked at my boss, and I said, yes, I can. And so then I broke it down, just basically what I told you. We've got these 5 outlying areas that are collecting all the information on cyber, and they're sending it back to Fort Belvoir, where we, the First Information Operations Command, can now see it and say, we've got a problem here, we need to get a ready team out there to fix that. And he said, okay, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? And I said, I don't know, I guess I was just too stupid to come out that easy, And my boss is over there going, oh God. So anyway, we get up and leave. He understands now, and he says, okay, this is the way I want the brief done all the time, but I don't need it briefed. I want you to send it to us. Said, and put cliff notes in there, whatever you want, but I don't need a person to come up here and brief me all the time. He says, if something emergency happens where I need to hear from you, not your briefer, you, then you call me. Now this is a full board colonel working for the the G3 of the Army. And he's saying, yes sir, yes sir. And so we get in the car, and he goes, I should have listened to you at the beginning. He said, how did you know? I said, I've worked with general officers almost all my military career. The guys aren't smart. They're just really amped up. They know what they need to know for that, but they don't know what you're talking about over here. So you gotta break it down for these guys, I said, that's the easiest way to do it. So from then on, I made all the briefs, sent them up with cliff notes, and I almost wanted to say, This is stupid, I know, but I'm telling you this because you won't understand the real words.
Right.
You know, we've got two computers that are talking to each other, but they're not our computers. So
Right.
we got guys that are out there talking to our computers, and they're getting information from us that they shouldn't be getting. We need to cut that line. And you know, the command is out there saying, I need that because it's a training network or whatever.
Yeah.
So then we'd go cut that whole thing when the G3 of the Army would say, cut it. And I'd say, okay. And he'd call and say, cut it. We're cutting it. We're just knocking it out, you know. So that's what would happen.
Yeah.
Well, I went from doing that to then becoming a director of one of the regional computer emergency response teams in Germany,
Huh, wow.
which was great. I mean, I worked with both AFRICOM and EUCOM and USAREUR at that time, because you know USAREUR was the big dog on the block at that time as far as the war machine, and both AFRICOM and EUCOM were there, and so I had to brief them on a daily basis of what was going on. Well, we also had NETCOM involved. NETCOM actually controls all the networks, and I'm briefing that their networks are broke, and they're telling everybody that they're working great. And so we had a conflict. So I had several general officers that would come to me and say, you can't report that. Yes, I can. So with that in mind, the Army then got wise and said, you know what, we need to either put both of these together or we need to have one command that's in charge of all of them. So we developed a command that's called the Cyber Command. And the Cyber Command now has charge of networks and the defense of the network. And it's run by, it was a 2-star, and then they bumped it up to a 3-star position. So General Red Hernandez was the first 3-star to be the commander of Cyber Command, which really worked out great.
Yeah.
I had known him when he was a full-bird colonel, and we had talked and everything, and so he knew of me, and he knew me. And at times he couldn't remember my name, but he'd say, get that old guy to come in here and brief me. And so I'd go in and brief him. But it was a fun time.
Yeah.
It really was. I thoroughly enjoyed my military career, and I enjoyed my civilian career. I retired at 41 years with both the military and the government, and was great. My wife enjoyed it. We spent 24 years in Europe. Had a wonderful time over there. Had a 1-year stint over in Hawaii, which we loved, but from Hawaii, that's where they sent me to Germany. They said, hey, we need you over in Germany. We had a mess up and we're getting rid of the guy over there. So I said, okay, I'm going to go, you know, because we want to go back to Germany. Although we bought a house in Hawaii. So, but it was fun. It was enjoyable.
Watches this interview 50 or 100 years down the road. What message would you like to send them about your service?
Oh, well, for one thing, I think serving in the military is an honorable thing. There are people that look at us as if, you know, we're just an arm of a government, but we're not. We're people representing the United States. We're out there every day showing our face to those people that we're either defending or we're fighting against. And we're doing it for what's good for the United States. So that's the one thing I would want to share with them. We're not people that are in it just for a job. You have to be dedicated to be, excuse me, you have to be dedicated to be in the military.
Right.
It's a hard job.
It's not for everyone.
No. My 94-year-old mother says, being old you can't be a sissy. And you can't be a sissy if you're in the military either. Because you're going to get jobs that you don't like. You're going to do things that you don't really think you should be doing, but you're going to do it because it's right for the United States.
Right.
So that's what I would pass on.
Well, that's good advice. Well, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, thank you for sitting down and talking to us. And thank you for your 41 years of service.
Well, you're welcome.
It is much appreciated.
And thank you for your service. I know you served also.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.